So thank you so much for the very informative presentations that I attended. My presentation, I guess, is a bit in a different topic, a bit different, going a bit different way. Since just to introduce myself, I am an associate professor at the School of Information Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. We are affiliated with the Information and Media School in Siegen University in Germany. This work is a collaboration between Thomas Haigh, who is in the history department, and our graduate student, Stefan Swanson, who helped with the data collection and data analysis. And what I will be talking about is about the project of Washington Post fact check. And we looked at the longitudinal study between elections of 2016 and 2020. And to be honest, the conclusions, looking at the data analysis, I was thinking how to conceptualize and what's the frame to apply. And then it just hit me that the framework of anti-intellectualism just applies perfectly, and it's not, and it's rise of intellectualism, because it actually was observed, and the term itself was coined in 1960s with the also as applied in the United States. But we will talk about this in the at the end in the conclusions. But my agenda for the presentation, I will start with the background for the study. I will look at the traditional traditional fact checking, and then also specifically focusing on Ukraine experience, and particularly the stopfake.org group, just very quickly, just reviewing it, because that was kind of our initial focus, and then we draw parallels with the situation in the environment in the United States, and with the rise of Trump, and between 2016 and 2020. So then I will talk about our methods and what results, and then the conclusions that reflected in our title, fact checking after truth, and also the rise of anti-intellectualism. So very quickly, because I'm sure that information is not new, that many of you already know it. But in the United States now, this is the misinformation, disinformation, and related to that fact checking is incredibly it's dominating, and it's it's very common. But I'm sure it's that in Canada it's kind of similar too, although I do believe that it is different than what's happening in the United States. But to start with, that it was initially, and fact checking started with pioneered with the group, the journalist group that, and then organization PolitiFact, that started in 2007 as an initiative of a newspaper, Tampa Bay Times. And then so the core of it was that the reporters conducted detailed evaluation of specific claims that politicians made. So they would, or political actors, and that would be not, elected officials or candidates and lobbying. And this is so kind of what they say, what politicians say, and then the fact checkers, the journalists, would actually cross-reference with the objective sources, and that usually would be the government statistics or testimony of academic experts or some other news outlets that are commonly accepted as a trusted news outlets. And then the results or the verdict of the fact checkers will be whether it's true or false or something in between. And depending on the organizations, they would classify it differently. And since that was starting 2007, the practice was spreading rapidly to other United States newspapers, and because now and then to other media outlets around the world. So they used this specific techniques that then other journalists and fact checkers adopted. You look what the claim is, you check and you check with the sources. You find the sources and you find other sources that would support or rebuff or rebuke the claim. But when you think about this, the traditional fact checking is so it still continues, and mainly it's a claim by a politician that would be taken from a news report. And what's important there, that the fact checkers, they would select the particular claim, so that the focusing on the process, there will be this editorial process when the fact checker actually make this select as a potential claim, as a claim for potential check. But so they assumed that actually it happened. They assumed that politician actually did say that, what they're saying. Whether it was true or not, that will be the next step for the fact checker to actually check with the sources. And this is very important because that leads to the assumption that the journalist actually believed in the concept of objectivity. And they also, besides that, it's you believe that the truth exists, and then what's published, what reported about the claim is truthful too. So this is obviously important assumptions to make. But it's also what it's based on, that there's a broader trust in academic experts, or in general to experts in the field, that that would be the people who are already kind of established, credible, credibility exists, and then they do know what they're talking about. There's also official statistics, usually produced by government, and that's also that you can trust those statistics, that will be something objective that exists. There is also the assumption that there are some mainstream authority that you can trust. And the also assumption is why this whole process, why journalists would go through that, because with the assumption that the opinion would be of readers could be changed about what they thought before about the claim that politician made. And this is and then because the claim would be reconciled or disputed with the original, with some trusted information source. And as I suspect you know where I'm leading to, that this is no longer true, and that's why our study is, I'm kind of now framing it and calling it as actually fact-checking after truth, because those basic assumptions we cannot make anymore, because this is what actually fake news, as we know, the term that lost its meaning, it was kind of misappropriated, that when you have completely fake or misinformation, but it's presented in a format of news reports. So something that completely made up, completely not true, presented as a news, and then the fact checker is going and checking it and refuting it. So that's the whole. So that's one. But then it's also what the consensus, and this is what another breakdown of the social consensus behind what's reliable reliability of experts, and also this mainstream reporting of credible information sources. And that's why we can say that now we live in a post-truth society. And that's obviously the choices after this. The journalists have to make the choices, those choices, whether they continue to evaluate specific claims by politicians, or they shift to debunking misinformation more generally. And that's why we started with, for the United States context, we started with Washington Post as one of the more prominent outlet that also their fact check project exists for quite a while. I also must admit that we took Washington Post as an example because we also did a study on South Korea fact-checking efforts, and we looked at the outlet in South Korea because they didn't have many. They pretty much had just one, and this Washington Post was, in terms of its what it was, its profile fitted the best with the South Korea project. But the making direct comparison is kind of more problematic because of the overall environment. Obviously, the cultural environment in the countries are quite different. But we also, what we draw on initially, and what kind of the idea of even starting the question came from our also study that we worked on collaboratively with stopfake.org, the quite small group of Ukrainian journalists who started their work in 2013 and 2014, that initially was very much inspired by the Western fact-checking practices. They actually had the manual from PolitiFact, how to do it, how to do the debunking, and they started working on specifically on Kremlin disinformation and Russia's fake news that were just dominating in Ukraine, starting from 2013, 2014, with the annexation of Crimea, with the pretty much invasion in Donbass. And I am saying this like just also to give you a bit of a background, that in 2013, when we started our study in the United States, obviously this question of fake news and disinformation and why Ukraine and what's relevance to the United States, it was kind of questionable. And obviously, guess what? Fast forward to 2016, it was obvious that the same practices and techniques of disinformation was just transplanted in the United States, and this is how Trump came to power. So we do see that the techniques are the same. And I just also I'll just jump a bit ahead with the 2022, that as we know now, the invasion, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and now pretty much this ethnic cleansing that is happening, that is conducted by Russia in Ukraine. This is a lot of it is connected to this disinformation hybrid war that started in Ukraine in 10 years prior to that. But it's also in the war that is going on now, the disinformation shifted its shape. The kind of the form is different, a bit different. It's evolved, and that's the whole. Also, the thing is that those techniques are evolving, but it's obviously they continue to be very important. So this is just the examples that we know that the Gerasimov's, the General Gerasimov's doctrine about the hybrid war and how important the information war and this disinformation. And Gerasimov is still there. He's still now conducting the like techniques are advanced and adopted to the actually now hot war and real war, what's happening, but so they are still there. And so as you know that quickly that the as Russia does, you know, they do something and then just deny that they have not done it, just and officials would be denying it, that it never happened. As I will not be listing now because then I get too emotional about it, what's happening now. But with the, it's just to state that it's a continuation. And this is, so what we actually focused on the work practices, how actually that fact checking, initially it was by stop fake, how it actually happened. And what we realized that the stop fake as a fact checkers, even that they started with the kind of manuals from PolitiFact, their practices actually and their approach was quite different. So I'll just quickly review this because we actually focusing on Washington Post as a continuation of the study. So to start with that, Stop Fake in 2013 already, they were not making those assumptions that the event, that the claim actually happened. And that's very important because in the West, that was the opposite. You can, if something is printed that the politician said, or if something broadcast on the television or in the, you know, on CNN or the news channels, it's assumed that it's really happened. From the beginning in Ukraine with the stop fake work, you cannot make those assumptions because they also, the experts, and that's why what they actually what they were referring to with their sources for the debunking disinformation was actually more of the it would be the metadata from the internet, if it, and lots of it were the images, if it will be the videos, the posts. They mainly looked actually at the origins of the source, what was claimed and what was referred to, rather than asking the experts the testimony, because many of the experts, particularly in Russia's claims, they were fake experts, and the things they did, it would be they would take the real name of the real expert that really exists, but it actually interview would be with completely somebody else who is not that expert, who just completely different person. Government statistics also, to start with Ukrainian government statistics that didn't exist, and as a legacy from the Soviet Union, you obviously cannot trust government statistics because it's a lie. And so that's why trusting metadata was more efficient. And this is, as we see that the parallels, that just 2 years after the annexation of Crimea in 2016, the events in the West, and as we know now also, since it passed in so much studies and so carefully, those events by now were studied, that how Brexit happened, that was done with the very similar techniques, with the kind of this hybrid war techniques. And as we know now, the presidential elections in the United States, it's still continuing from 2016 to 2020, that this is the results are challenged, that the results that and that's what the challenge is for the fact checkers, that how you deal with this, because as we know, so the Trump campaign just relied on lies. They just blatant lies, and it's kind of, and he still has big following, and similar, the Boris Johnson in the United Kingdom, that was very similar approach, just habitual dishonesty, just lying in your just openly lying. And also, but obviously what happens is, what we see is that neither of those candidates seem to lose support as a result of their actions of this. So that's why it was difficult to deal with. So through 4 years of, as we know, 2016 to 2020, the environment in the United States changed a lot, because Trump pretty much normalized this habitual lying. They kind of this continuing to make claims that are just evidence-free, and yet, and as you know, now it continues with these conspiracy theories and of voter fraud, that it costs him re-elections. And what we are seeing, that yet majority of Republican voters still follow, and as you know, Trump dominates Republican Party. So what does it mean? So it is the populism, but it's something more than it's more than populism. It's really this core of distrust to conventional informational sources, and this is how we believe that the dawn of the post-truth society. So what we see, so just a little bit more, the statistics is that how Trump dealt with the reports, the fact-checking reports. He just started calling all the sources as fake news, as you know, and what previously were reliable, it's New York Times, BBC, that was now it's not anymore. And this distrust to experts that followed. And this study that was done by Graves and Matralis in 2020 showed that as a result also, that the checking of political statements actually fell by 20% between 2016 and 2019. And while the checking the viral reports, so those emotional clickbaits that people would get attracted, those reports were checking those rose by 50%. So this is that's why we wanted to check how we kind of knew how the Stop Fake was doing it in Ukraine, but again, it's a different country, it's a different environment. And we wanted to check how it's happening in the United States. And what we see, that actually as a Western fact checker, that there's continuity in the practices from 2016 to 2020. So they maintained the focus on evaluation of claims by politician, rather than pivoting to address misinformation and disinformation more generally. And I am digressing a little bit, but in case I will not have time later, that this is where I'm making this jump to overall anti-intellectualism environment in the United States, that it's more than just populism from politicians. Because when you think about this, whether I believe or not believe certain claim or certain source, it's actually made those decisions I made on individual level. Every person makes this choice whether to believe it or not. Why they do it, there are many factors to that. It's obviously how they form whom they trust. It usually goes into trust, but also why they would trust certain sources and not others. This is actually made by individual people, and that's what kind of the responsibility of the why the misinformation is spreading. It's actually, we have to be honest about this, that it's actually it lies on individuals too. It's on, and we are as a group form this environment, and that's what I am now seeing it very clearly, that the main difference that actually in Ukraine and the United States, the environments are very different. Actually, in Ukraine, they did have very different circumstances, but they do not have this anti-intellectualism, that actually they do trust their sources. They are experts. If there are established, credible experts that would be respected by the government and by the external experts too, outsiders, and this is what majority of population will believe. So this is, they have very different environment, but it's also that the whole environment for acknowledging how widespread misinformation and disinformation is actually also, it's much more broad, and it's in the education. This is what I'm also studying, and this is the difference too in the libraries as centers for fighting disinformation, on kind of this overly on a national level, starting from the grassroots on to national level. So I'm just saying that there is a continuity and connection in the environment, in the society, and this is how we see what's the kind of this post-truth environment and what anti-intellectualism kind of is. I also, so we looked at the Washington Post, and we saw that the practices kind of stayed the same. However, they did very famously compiled a database of all Trump's lies over 40 years of over 4 years of his presidency, and the database contains over 30,000 entries. So for our study, what we did, we started with the research questions whether the Washington Post fact check practices changed between the elections, whether they again were shifting to debunking of the kind of widely shared myth and conspiracy theories, which would be more those fake news. So it's something that presented as news, but completely made up and actually very hard to dispute. So it's kind of more that Snopes in the United States, this is what Snopes they do. So we kind of wanted to see whether Washington Post is shifting. And then whether they, what information sources they used, and are they kind of closer to, getting closer to stop fake, which kind of was our original, that's why we're linking everything with this. And it's also because how we analyzed Washington Post practices really followed the model we developed for the study of the Ukrainian stopfake.org. And how we did it, so for the method, we looked at the categories of the claims that the editorial board or people participating in fact checking selected, and then what sources they used. And this is the results, what we analyzed. So if you see that, so we compared for the Washington Post, we compared 2016 and 2020. So we looked at see the type of claim still very much focused on politicians' claims. That didn't change. They did have also that they would conduct kind of a summary or explanation of the kind of host of issues, controversial issues, rather than specific claim. And actually also what we saw that in that at that respect, actually, they started doing less of it. So they were focusing more on the individual claims. So this is kind of moving away, further away from the from what what Snopes is doing, and also what Stop Fake in Ukraine were doing. I also highlighted the differences, that it was interesting also that we see that actually Washington Post chose to debunk much in terms of the sources, what they used when they so this is what sources they used. And actually, if you see, they used 7% less of expert opinion, independent expert opinion, to debunk the source. Then also, if you see, they also used less of for debunking as sources, the credible news sources. They also used less of existing analysis by credible think tanks and nonprofit groups. They also used less of laws and government regulations. And this is also including the in that category for the source, it was also the statistics that would be government regulation too. So this is that points, this dynamic actually points to this, that fact that the Washington Post fact check actually responds to the overall environment, what's happening in the United States, and that this is definitely points out to this anti-intellectualism trends in the United States. So they but if specifically, if you will look, the only way that the Washington Post fact checks inched slightly closer to Stop Fake, because they started looking more at the quotes. What they analyzed is the more quotes taken out of the context, because Stop Fake did this a lot. And as you know, this is done a lot, that you just take, the politicians do this a lot, just take the half sentence, what was said, put it completely out of context, and that the meaning becomes completely opposite. But the main thing is that the authority of experts was in decline. This is also that in when you look at the assumptions that the Washington Post made, it stayed the same. And this is because they still assume that what is reported is actually happened, which Stop Fake couldn't do, because they had so much from the beginning. It was obvious that so much was just made up. And so what we see, the overall continuity is in their practices. And this is where I keep saying anti-intellectualism, and I just want to remind that how it's defined. And again, that was actually coined in the 1960s, that it's a hostility and overall mistrust to intellect, intellectuals, and intellectualism. So until intellectuals present themselves as perceived as the champions of common folk. I hope that sounds familiar to you, what we see right now, that there are these characteristics of the populism, but it's more than, so it's against political and academic elitism, but it's more than populism. And the main, also the things tends to see educated people as a status class that dominates political discourse, and higher education being detached from the concerns of ordinary people. I hope again that that sounds familiar. But it's also what's what's really disturbing and concerning, that this is also a known tool to use by totalitarian governments to manipulate and apply this anti-intellectualism to repress political dissent, and also to start kind of this anti-intellectual. There are many examples where the intellectualism flourished, and to start with, at least that's what kind of was close to our study too, that in 1917, the Bolshevik Revolution actually was dominated by anti-intellectualism, because this is what they are based on, that the Soviet government consisted of men and women, uneducated, like lacking any formal education. But in parallel, actually, what's interesting, that United States was formed initially, it actually was the opposite, that when the United States, which is after the revolution for independence, they actually formed, and they're based on intellectual claims, and intellect and knowledge and expertise was really valued a lot. So this is, in that perspective, we actually see that in Ukraine, they kind of shifted from they're shifting away from the Soviet legacy. And unfortunately, what we see in the United States, they are shifting away from actually their more intellectual roots, shifting to anti-intellectualism. So this is, I just quickly, this is not even that, yeah, so that's the database of Trump lies. And this is what my conclusion is, that actually the that we see in the United States that now the populism, but it's also this just distrust, and that it doesn't matter whether the politician is saying whether it's true or not. And this is what's creating this post-truth society and moving forward to the anti-intellectualism. Thank you.